Hare Krishna everybody. Today we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 11, verses 18 and 19. Sorry. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, if you have the verses, you can follow along and you can repeat after me. Varendram Purusa Kritya Brahmane Sasumangale Shankhaturya Ninadena Brahma Ghoshena Chardata Prayujjagamo Rather Hristya Prana Gatha Swad Sadhavasha Varendaram Puraskritra Brahmane Susamangale Shankhaturya Ninadena Brahma Ghoshena Chardrita Prayujjagamo Rather Hristya Pranayagata Sasvata Varendram Purusa Kritya Brahmane Susamangale Shankhaturya Ninadena Brahma Ghoshena Chardrita Pratyujjagamau Rather Hristya Pranagatha Swadhashata. If anyone would like to repeat the verse, you can repeat.
Varendram Purusakritya Brahmane Sasumangale Shankhaturya Ninadena Brahma Ghoshena Chadrita Pratyujjagmo Rathe Hristya Pranayagata Satvashaha. So, translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. They hastened towards the Lord on chariots, with brahmanas bearing flowers. Before them were elephants, emblems of good fortune. Conch shells and bugles were sounded, and Vedic hymns were chanted. Thus they offered their respects, which were saturated with affection. The Vedic way of receiving a great personality creates an atmosphere of respect, which is saturated with affection and veneration for the person received. The auspicious atmosphere of such a reception depends on the paraphernalia described above, including conch shells, flowers, incense, decorated elephants, and the qualified brahmanas reciting verses from the Vedic literatures. Such a program of reception is full of sincerity and on the part of both the receiver and the received. I'll just read the translation and purport of the next verse also, verse number 19. At the same time, many hundreds of well-known prostitutes began to proceed on various vehicles. They were all very eager to meet the Lord, and their beautiful faces were decorated with dazzling earrings, which enhanced the beauty of their foreheads. Purport: We may not hate even the prostitutes if they are devotees of the Lord. Even to date, there are many prostitutes in great cities of India who are sincere devotees of the Lord. By tricks of chance, one may be obliged to adopt the profession, which is not a very adorable in society, but that does not hamper one in executing devotional service to the Lord. Devotional service to the Lord is uncheckable in all circumstances. It is understood herewith that even in those days, about 5,000 years ago, there were prostitutes in a city like Dwarka, where Lord Krishna resided. This means that prostitutes are necessary citizens for the proper upkeep of society. The government opens wine shops, but this does not mean that the government encourages the drinking of wine. The idea is that a class of men who will drink at any cost, and it has been experienced that prohibition in great cities encouraged illicit smuggling of wine. Similarly, men who are not satisfied at home require such concessions. And if there is no prostitute, then such low men will induce others into prostitution. It is better that prostitutes be available in the marketplace so that the sanctity of society can be maintained. It is better to maintain a class of prostitutes than to encourage prostitutes within society. The real reformation is to enlighten all people to become devotees of the Lord, and that will check all kinds of deteriorating factors of life. Sri Bilvamangal Thakur, a great acharya of the Vishnu Swami Vaishnava sect, in his household life was overly attached to a prostitute who happened to be a devotee of the Lord. One night, when the Thakur came to Chintamani's house in the torrents of rain and thunder, Chintamani was astonished to see how the Thakur could come on such a dreadful night after crossing a foaming river which was full of waves. She said to Thakur Bilvamangal that his attraction for the flesh and bone to an insignificant woman like her would be properly utilized if it could be diverted to devotional service of the Lord to achieve attraction for the transcendental beauty of the Lord. It was a momentous hour for the Thakur, and he took a turn towards spiritual realization by the words of a prostitute. Later on, the Thakur accepted the prostitute as his spiritual master, and in several places of his literary works, he glorified the name of Chintamani, who showed him the right path. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 32, the Lord says, O son of Partha, even the low-born Chandalas and those who are born in family of unbelievers and even the prostitutes shall attain perfection of life if they take shelter of unalloyed devotional service to me. Because in the path of devotional service, there are no impediments due to degraded birth and occupation. The path is open for everyone who agrees to follow it. It appears that the prostitutes of Dwarka, who were so eager to meet the Lord, were all his unalloyed devotees, and thus they were all on the path of salvation according to the above version of Bhagavad Gita. Therefore, the only reformation that is necessary in society is to make an organized effort to turn citizens into devotees of the Lord, and thus all good qualities of the denizens of heaven will overtake them in their own way. On the other hand, those who are non-devotees have no good qualifications whatsoever, however they may be materially advanced. The difference is that the devotees of the Lord are on the path of liberation, whereas the non-devotees are on the path of further entanglement in material bondage. The criterion for advancement of civilization is whether the people are educated and advanced on the path of salvation. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamahyam Dadati Sopadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamlam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Rahunatan Mitam Tam Sajivam Sahadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Mitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishpanusate Devi Pranabhavi Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Guru Vaishnav Bhagwan Tine Rasmarane Hoy Vigna Vinashan Anayashe Hoy Nijamanchita Puran Namam Vishnu Padai Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gaurumani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shuddhivadi Pashyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the chapter we're discussing here is called Lord Krishna's entrance into Dwarka. So Lord Krishna has left Hastinapur and he is coming back into Dwarka. And for the last few days, we've been discussing how elaborate celebrations and elaborate arrangements were made to welcome the Lord back into Dwarka. So here we see that in the first verse we discussed, they used, it's quite a contrast actually. So we see that on one hand, there were lots of chariots where the Brahmanas came. So the Brahmanas came and the Brahmanas were bringing flowers. And on the other hand, in the next verse, there's a contradiction there's a stark contrast because we see that lots of prostitutes also came and they were also offering respects to the Lord. And they were just as eagerly welcoming the Lord as the Brahmanas themselves. So this was when I first read this about like 7 or 8 years ago. It was a bit controversial. I was thinking, well, how is it possible that in a pure city like Dwarka, that people like prostitutes can exist? Well, not only prostitutes. If prostitutes are existing, it means that there are probably people who are utilizing those prostitutes also. So it was a bit of a shock to me how it is possible in Dwarka for such actions or activities to occur in the first place. But then Srila Prabhupada explains that actually all of this is part of the Varnashram system. So in the Varnashram system, you are going to have all different kinds of people. So essentially the Varnashram system explains that there are different classes and different caliber of people. So on the topmost level, you have the Brahmanas. The duties of the Brahmanas, as we know, are Shama, Dama, Tapa, Saucham, Shama, Dama, Tapa, Saucham, Shanti, Marjama, Vimacha, Jnanam, Vijnanam, Arjavam, Brahmanam, Swabhavajam, which means that the Brahmanas, they engage in particular types of activities, which means they practice austerity, they practice self-control, they also practice simplicity, they practice in cultivation of knowledge, and they are also very self-realized also. So the Brahmanas are meant to be the top of society, and at the same time they are completely detached. And then below them we have Kshatriyas. So Kshatriyas are people who are very valorous, and they also have good qualities in the sense of they are also very learned, but they are also very opulent and they have to manage the whole administration of society. So then you have the Kshatriyas, and below them you have the Vaishyas. And Vaishyas are basically the people who do Krishi Goraksha. Krishi Goraksha means that they do farming and they are involved in cow protection. And then they are the ones who give employment to all different kinds of people, who are the Shudras. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that for the Shudras, service to other people is what will make them perfect. Those are the exact words that Srila Prabhupada uses, that for Shudras, offering service to the Lord makes them perfect. Now this is quite interesting because there is a huge sect in the Vedic culture known as the Mayavadis or the Advaitavadis, who think that only the Brahmanas, and even within the Brahmanas, only the sannyasis are those who can get liberation, or only these people can get mukti. But the Bhakti tradition is completely against that view, because we think that not only the Brahmanas and not only the sannyasis, but any person in any stage of the Varnashrama system can get mukti, or they can obtain the perfection of life. And we see this through many, many examples. So the main criteria that is required is that one should surrender onto the feet of the Supreme Lord. So if one surrenders onto the Supreme Lord, then one is qualified to obtain mukti, or one is qualified to obtain liberation. But if one does not surrender onto the Lord, even if he may be a Brahmana, that person will not get liberation. Like for example, in the Mahabharata, there is one very interesting episode of Vyadha. I don't know how many of you know this pastime, but Vyadha means butcher. So we know that one of the principles of Varnashrama is that a person should not eat meat. But we see that in Mahabharata, there is one person known as Vyadha. So what happens is the pastime goes as follows. So once upon a time, there is one sage called Kaushika. And this Kaushika is very proud of some of his benedictions he had received from his father. So he used to engage in lots of austerity. And because of that, he had the benediction that whenever he would desire something, that would come true. In the sense that if he wanted to kill someone, or if he wanted to burn someone with his eyes, he could burn someone with his eyes. So one day he was just trying it out, like one day he was meditating under the tree. And what happened was there was a bird who was sitting on top of him, and that bird pooed on him. Like, like pigeons, they like to sit exactly on top of you, and they like to poo exactly on top of you. So that's what the bird decided to do that day. So that pigeon pooed on him. And then when it disturbed his meditation, he looked up with anger. And as soon as he looked up with anger, the bird just turned into ashes. So then he became quite proud of his power, that, like, I have this power that I can burn people down. So one day he was going around, he was asking for bhiksha. So he went to one house, and over there was one woman who opened the door. And then she said that, look, I can't give you your alms now because I'm serving to my husband. My husband is sick, so just wait at the door. So she asked him to wait. So 1 minute turned to 2 minutes, 2 minutes turned to 3 minutes, 3 minutes turned to 10 minutes, 10 minutes turned to 15 minutes. Now the sage was getting impatient because he had to go and perform his austerities. So he started becoming extremely angry, and he started speaking in a loud voice. And he said, how dare you make a sage wait at your door? He says, do you not know my power? Then the woman came running out, and she said, I know your power very well. And she said, you can try looking at me angrily, but your power won't work here. So he tried to burn her, but he was not able to burn her. So then he became a bit startled. He said that, my father gave me this benediction that I could burn up anyone, but I'm not able to burn up this woman. Why is that? So then he asked her, he said, first of all, you knew that I have this power, which I didn't tell anyone. So he said, that in itself is a very amazing feat. He said, on top of that, I'm not able to burn you. He said, how is that possible? So she said that I am a very chaste woman. The reason you're not able to burn me is because I'm engaged in my dharma of serving my husband at this point. So he said that, okay, well, if that's the case, he said, I have a lot to learn. Because he said that I thought that I could burn up anyone, but it sounds like, if you perform your dharma, that dharma is much more powerful than my own mystic power. So he says that, okay, well, I want to learn more about dharma. Can you teach me about how to follow dharma? So she says that actually you should go and learn how to follow dharma from Vyadha. What does Vyadha mean? Vyadha means that Vyadha is a butcher. So now he was even more shocked. He said that, okay, first of all, like a simple household, like a housewife was able to overpower my austerities, overpower my benediction. On top of that, now I have to go and learn the art of dharma from a butcher. So he was even more startled. So then he went there, he went into the town, and he found this Vyadha. And he spoke to the Vyadha, and the Vyadha taught him that, like, I am engaged in this work of butchery because of my past karmas. Because in the previous lives, I had done bad karma. Because of that, I am born into this family of butchers, and that is my familial occupation. And because of that, I do this. Now he says, however, when I perform this occupation, I have no desire to enjoy the fruits of this occupation. So whatever results I get, I offer it to the Supreme Lord. He said, whatever money I get, I use that in the service of Brahmanas, and I use that to serve the Supreme Lord. So he says, because of that, I have learned the art of dharma through my own practice. So he said that I am not actually attached to killing animals. So now you may think that, like on one hand, you have one person who's a Brahmana. On the other hand, you have a simple housewife. And on top of that, you have a butcher. And you can see that the hierarchy is exactly the opposite. Like the butcher is more powerful than the housewife, and the housewife seems to be more powerful than the Brahmana. So it is possible that if one is performing their duties in the right consciousness, if they're performing their karma, swadharma, as it is explained, if they're performing that in the right consciousness, then sometimes some people may be engaged in some kind of abominable activity. Maybe because of their past karmas or because of the situation of society at that point. But regardless of that, if they remember the feet of the Supreme Lord, the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, then their activities also become purified, even if they're engaged in abominable activities. So that is why we see here that Srila Prabhupada mentions that, that there are many even to date, there are many prostitutes in great cities of India who are sincere devotees of the Lord. Now you might think, how is it possible for a prostitute to be a devotee of the Lord? Because that is such an abominable profession. But it comes down to exactly the same thing, because lots of women are forced into this kind of practice. And some women actually, because of their past karmas, they may have an inclination to act in such a way. Like Srila Prabhupada notes that when he was young, his mother would have a maidservant who would come every day to like a hair maid basically. Like she would come and tie his mother's hair or everything every day. And Srila Prabhupada said that at night you would see that she would be standing on the side of the street wearing red color clothes and red lipstick and all of that. So she was engaged in prostitution. And he said that no one cared. Like all respectable members of society, including the Brahmanas, she would go and work in their houses during the day and she would do all these kinds of things at night. So he said that, there are people like this in society, but as long as they're not causing disturbance in society, such a kind of people, especially in the broad sense of Varnashrama, in the broad sense of society, these kinds of people, a small section of these kinds of people may be required. Because Srila Prabhupada also notes in the purport that if these kinds of professions are not there in society, then that can actually be disastrous. Because then basically the people who are not satisfied with their marriage, these kinds of men, of course, like for a devotee, these things are not important, but this is more like a social commentary. This is a commentary on how to run the whole world. And because Krishna's Dwarka was a huge, you could say, kingdom at that point, there were all different kinds of people. So there may be a class of men who may be inclined to use prostitutes, who may not be satisfied, but if prostitutes are not there, they may go and tarnish the reputation of other respectable women. So that is why Srila Prabhupada recommends that sometimes prostitutes may be required. So it's not that we should encourage them, or it's not that we should encourage that kind of profession, but it's that if some people have an inclination, or if some people have this occupation, then it should not be taken away from them. That's what Srila Prabhupada is pointing out. So one thing that comes out from this verse is that it doesn't matter what your social situation is. What matters is how much one is devoted to the Supreme Lord, how much one is engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. One may be a very elevated Brahmana, but that elevated Brahmana may be much below the people who have more unflinching devotion to the lotus feet of the Lord. Like we see in Krishna Lila also, there are Brahmanas who are living just on the outskirts of Vrindavan, but they do not want to feed Krishna because they think that performing yajna is more important than feeding Krishna. Whereas we see that the gopis, who are cowherd women, so on the Varnashrama scale, they would come under, so you would have Brahmanas, you would have Kshatriyas, and then you would have Vaishyas. So these women were Vaishya women, and they knew that serving Krishna or making sure that Krishna's happiness is looked after is of utmost importance compared to these Brahmanas. So over there, the Brahmanas themselves, when they realize their mistake, they also notice that they also say that actually these gopis of Vrindavan are much higher than ourselves as well. So unflinching devotional service to the Supreme Lord is more important. And actually this is kind of a reassurance for us, because we may be engaged in all different kinds of occupations also. Maybe because of our past life choices or because of our own karma in the past life. And we may be doing things which we may not be very comfortable with. Like, for example, like when you are, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure all of you can speak from your point of view also. Like, for example, like when you're working as a doctor, you may have to give immunizations, or you may have to give injections to people to prevent them from diseases which may not contain very sattvic elements. Like, for example, some heavy metals are there which are not good for the body in the very long run, or some of them may even contain some meat products. So sometimes you have to give these kinds of medications to alleviate a person's suffering. Like Srila Prabhupada himself notices that many of the formulations that he would make when he was working as a pharmacist, he used alcohol. So you have to use some of these things to treat people. So every profession will have some kind of imperfection or some kind of thing which you don't like doing. But at the end of the day, those things are not as important as our devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Now, of course, if we are engaged in very sinful activities, the devotee may desire to, get out of those sinful activities. Like we have examples of many devotees, even on New Govardhan farm, who, especially one of them I know personally, who was actually working at a beef farm. Like his family was maintaining a beef farm for the last 20 or 30 years. And he grew up on that beef farm. But by Krishna's mercy, or through the mercy of the devotees, he became a devotee. And he gave up all of those, he gave up all of that activity. And after his parents passed away, he sold the farm to someone else. And he used that money to give all of that money to the New Govardhan farm. So you can see that if a devotee sincerely desires, then Krishna may somehow or the other make adjustments in their life. We see that when Srila Prabhupada was also around, like lots of people came to him because some of his disciples came to him with tears in their eyes. They said that they heard Srila Prabhupada's lectures and they became convinced that, we should become pure devotees of the Lord. But at the same time, they were running, one of them was running an alcohol factory. So he was making alcohol and selling alcohol. So he came to Srila Prabhupada. He was, I think, a Gujarati man. So he came to Srila Prabhupada and said that, I am very much sorry that I'm running a alcohol factory. So he said, what can I do? So then Srila Prabhupada thought for a moment, and it's very shocking because Srila Prabhupada had tears in his eyes also. And he said, what can you do? He said that this is the way of the material world. He said that you have to fill your belly somehow. So he said that it's okay, you continue doing that, that's fine. So the devotee, for the time being, he became satisfied and he was so pleased with Srila Prabhupada's compassion and he left away. But it is noted that, like 2 or 3 years down the track, Krishna gave him the intelligence so that he was able to alter his course of business and he was able to sell off his alcohol factory and then he eventually started something else. So it is to be understood that not everyone may be able to give up all kinds of, or they may not be able to change their worldly situation right away. And the devotees have to be practical about this. And in fact, the Vaishnava tradition is the only one which is practical about this. The Mayavadi traditions are not practical about this because according to them, no one can obtain perfection. Like if you look at Ramayana, for example, like there is one personality whom Lord Ram personally gave moksha to, or Lord Ram personally sent to Vaikuntha. Does anyone know who that personality is? Jatayu. Jatayu is the only personality in Ramayana who Lord Ram willingly and by his own will gave moksha to, or he sent that personality to the spiritual world. Now, who was Jatayu? Jatayu was a vulture. Now, what do vultures eat? Vultures basically thrive off corpses. They eat dead bodies. So in Vedic tradition, vultures are considered very abominable. Like if you come in contact with a vulture, it's considered you have to undergo purificatory processes. But Lord Ram still personally, he not only gave Jatayu moksha or sent Jatayu back to the spiritual world, but he also performed Jatayu's last rites with his own hands because Jatayu performed devotional service. Jatayu surrendered himself to the feet of the Lord and he performed a service that no one else could have performed, especially at that age. Jatayu, it is explained, he was 60,000 years old. So he was as old as his father Dashratha. And still, despite that, he fought with Ravana, even though he knew that he was going to lose his life to protect Sita. So that is what captured Lord Ram's heart. So Lord Ram is more interested, or Krishna is more interested in how much we are interested in serving him, despite our present circumstances. So that should be our motivation, and that is why this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is actually encouraging for all devotees that, like we may be engaged in different kinds of occupations, or our material situation may not be very conducive towards purity, just like that of the Brahmanas. But that should not deter us from performing devotional service. In fact, if anything, we should perform devotional service with more and more enthusiasm so that we can ultimately obtain the lotus feet of Krishna. So having said that, I will finish there. If anyone has any comments or any thoughts you can share, or anything you disagree with, we can discuss that also. Yes, Prabhu?
So would it be right in interpreting this as prostitution as a profession, or any profession for that matter, is basically explained at a bodily concept, at a bodily level?
Yeah.
And as long as your soul is doing its eternal duty, which is service to the Supreme Personality, then everything is all good. Would that be one of the right interpretations of this?
Yeah, it's a very complex topic because so on one hand we may say that, well, only service to the Lord is important and then material duties don't matter at all. On the other hand, we can go to the other extreme and say that no, as long as your material duties are not perfectly in line with devotional service, you cannot obtain Krishna. So reality is, through Srila Prabhupada's example, we see that reality is somewhere in between. So it's not that, it may be the case that for some people, changing their material circumstances is impossible. So for them, it may be necessary that they engage wholeheartedly in devotional service only. Ultimately, Krishna is the one who judges, like whether someone is sincere in heart or not. But for some people, it may very well be possible to change their material circumstances. So in which case, a person should endeavor to try to change their material circumstances, if possible. So reality is somewhere in between, and you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. But we can't say that material duties have no importance at all, or we can't say that material duties are like by themselves, they're the ones that determine whether we go back home, back to Godhead or not. There's a lot of gray area in between, unfortunately. And yeah, it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But as far as possible, Srila Prabhupada says that we should try to dovetail our material duties in Krishna's service. He uses his word dovetail quite a lot. Dovetail means that, like there's a dovetail joint. Like in carpentry, there's a dovetail joint. And basically, it means that you try to align your material duties in such a way that basically the crux of devotional service. What is the crux of devotional service? It is smartavyam satatam Vishnu, vishmartavya na jatuchit, which means that we should always remember Vishnu and we should not forget him. So these are the two principles by which we devotees live. So if our material duties somehow allow us to be always conscious of Krishna, then great, that's fine. If we are not able to remain conscious of Krishna, then that is probably not ideal, and a devotee should endeavor to try to change them. Yeah. But again, it may or may not be possible, but at least that desire should be there. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu?
Yeah, I just was thinking on that point, and this is just a comment. Like, we know that with the advancement of Kali Yuga, the consciousness is degrading. Like, like just reading this purport, or probably the verse for the sake of reading it, or, wine shop Prabhupada mentions, and then, in that sense, like Prabhupada also mentions, slaughterhouses should be banned, right? But then here, it's saying the wine shops, and also the prostitutes. So I was just thinking that, like as far as Varnashram Dharma during that time was concerned, it was very much cultured or governed, I suppose. Whereas these days, we just take it for the sake of taking it, like on the face value, right? I mean, of course, in a literary way, there is prostitutions, but we can see in the age of social media, there is also unofficial prostitutions. In the same way, there is officially there are wine shops, liquor shops, but then there is unofficial way of like social drinking, what they call it.
Yeah.
Right. I think the point here is that like if we sort of match exactly how it was in those days, then take it as a ground. Okay, now we should have it.
Yeah.
Or probably the other way. Typically, what happens is that especially people from India, they think work is worship.
Yeah. That's right.
Right. That's another extreme.
Yeah.
So I think I personally feel that probably the underlying platform has to be clear. Like the Varnashram is actually cultivated and guided properly under the the proper king, the brahmanas. In that way, those professions are allowed to a certain degree for purification. I suppose that's
Yeah, so that's one main difference between society nowadays and society back in the day. Society nowadays, there's no purpose for society. The only purpose for society is that people can come in together and they can fulfill their desires. That is what the Constitution actually says, that we want to respect individual rights so that people can exercise their freedom. That is the underlying premise for society nowadays. But the underlying premise for society back in the day was that ultimately we want to purify our activities and become liberated from this material world. So that was the underlying premise for society. So because that was the premise, all activities which were allowed or permissible in Vedic culture were done in such a way that would allow a person to become purified. So for example, like as Prabhu mentioned that meat eating was allowed in Vedic culture also. Like back in the day, meat eating was allowed. But slaughterhouses were not there. So how was meat eating allowed? So basically on one day of the month, people were allowed to slaughter like certain animals. There were 5 kinds of animals that you could slaughter, and you could slaughter these kinds of animals in front of Durga or Devi and utter certain mantras. And one of those mantras basically reads as follows. It says that in this life I am very much attached to my tongue and I am unable to control my senses, and because of that I am killing you. So in my next life, I give you permission to kill me. So that is the mantra you have to chant before slaughtering the animal. So you can imagine, like if a person does this 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, eventually that consciousness will hit him. Like that thought will hit him that, okay, well, maybe I should not do this because eventually I'm going to suffer the reactions of all of this. So on one hand, because we have seen, like if you take away something from someone, like something that someone is very much addicted to, let's say you take away meat from society completely, you ban it completely, then there will be a black market. We see that throughout, like every time anyone has tried to ban anything, it creates a black market. Like drugs, we see there's a black market. In places where alcohol is not allowed, there's a black market. Like in Northern Territory, for example, it's considered a dry zone. Dry zone means that the indigenous people or aboriginal people there are not allowed to buy alcohol at all. So what do? They take their Centrelink money, and then whenever there are some Westerners or someone coming, they offer them money. Like, hey, here's some money, can you go and get some alcohol for me from the wine shop, for example. So then all of the money that was given to them for their eating and for their maintenance, they spend on alcohol. So we know that from history that banning something does not work. So basically then you have to devise society, or you have to structure society in such a way that even these people with lower tendencies can eventually become purified. And that is how, as Prabhu mentioned, Vedic society was structured. So Vedic society was not exclusive, like okay, if you're eating meat, you can't come. If you want to engage in prostitution, you cannot come, etc. It was all inclusive. All people were allowed to come, and all people had to follow certain rules and regulations so that their desires could be purified eventually. And that was the purpose of Vedic society. Whereas modern day society is not like that. Modern day society, the premise is, I need to have my individual rights so that I can exercise my freedom. I want to do whatever I like. But Vedic society was not like that. Freedom was only given, or the only right that was given to people was so that they could perform their duty, which Krishna says also in Bhagavad Gita. Karmanye eva adhikaraste. He says that, like nowadays we have human rights, right to property, right to, right to practice religion, right to do all of these, all of that. None of these were there in Vedic constitution. The only right you had in Vedic constitution was karmani eva adhikaraste, which means you only had the right to perform your duty. That's it. And there will be no obstructions to you performing your duty. Like the government will make sure in such a way, organize the whole society in such a way that there are no obstructions to performing your duty. And people were duty-centered. That's why back in the day, people were duty-centered. But nowadays, people are self-centered. I want to enjoy myself, because that's the underlying premise of society. And that's why Srila Prabhupada said that modern day society and devotional service are at conflict with each other, because the underlying premises of both are completely different. So yeah, thank you for bringing up that point also, Prabhu. Yeah. Okay, if there's no other comments or questions or anything, then we can finish there. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya vacha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Breakfast prasadam, start side.